Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to review a high-end digital-to-digital converter, or DDC for short, that is called Musician Theonix, that goes for $16.99. Although this is their first DDC, this is also their statement DDC, and as I see it, all their future devices will be smaller, more affordable, but also less impressive on the spec sheet. Now, compared to a DAC, this one converts a digital to analog signal. This one converts a digital format into another one. And if you are asking yourself why you need to pay $16.99 for something that you can get for a lot cheaper, like those thumb drive DDC converters, maybe coaxial to DDC adapter cables, that's a very easy question that leads to a complicated answer. But let's check first all its inputs and outputs, and then I will explain you down to the smallest details all its inner workings and why you might be interested in such a device. First of all, there isn't an on-off button on this one, so just attach a power cable and it will slowly turn on and start cooking those internal crystal clocks. For the best results, I do not recommend turning it off. It doesn't consume a lot of power and it sounds better after a few hours of warm-up, especially those crystal clocks. They need to be a little warmer for the best results. Now, as you can see, it has 6 buttons on its front plate and several low-intensity LEDs. With the first 4 buttons, you can select your desired digital input, and the other 2 should be used only if you have an I2S capable DAC. And considering that I2S wasn't standardized yet, and everybody does I2S slightly differently, they added 8 I2S presets that should work with most of your DACs, regardless of brand or working mode. After pressing setup, press the Coax button and you can choose between 8 presets by pressing the OK button. Pick the right I2S configuration, press setup again, and that's pretty much it. If you won't be using an I2S connection, then you don't need to follow these steps. As for inputs and outputs, it can accept USB, AAC, optical, coaxial, 49 and 45 MHz clock inputs. Musician still doesn't have a DAC that can offer clock inputs, but I guess Theonix is already teasing a higher-end DAC in the making. As for outputs, you have your coaxial, optical, I2S via Ethernet, I2S via HDMI, and 2 AAC digital outputs. The only output that is missing is BNC, but you can get a cheap RCA to BNC adapter if you intend on using it with Chord electronic DACs. Its dedicated webpage doesn't tell me a lot about its internal components, about its working mode, so I needed to disassemble the unit myself and just follow that signal path. For starters, there's an audio-grade Furutech pure copper INC inlet, and AC filter follows that includes several protection systems. A switching mode power supply from Minwell will clean up the mess and send everything to an oversized O-core linear transformer, and I'm already getting quite excited. On the right side, there's a massive filtering stage consisting of tens of voltage regulators and Musician-branded electrolytic capacitors. More than half of its PCB is occupied by a massive power supply and filtering stage, and that thought already makes me excited. Just above that Minwell transformer, you can see a proprietary USB interface that supports all the highest sampling rates natively, including DSD files. Exactly in the middle of the board, you can spot several high-speed isolators. These will block remaining noise from one part of the board to the other. An Altera chip follows that works as an FPGA, monitoring clock performance, reclocking the signal, and lowering the incoming jitter as much as possible. Lastly, you can see a Musician-branded shiny metal box that houses 2 oven-controlled femtosecond crystal oscillators. The metal housing works as a shield against remaining wireless interference, but also as a thermostat controlling temperature of the quartz crystals for an optimum performance at all times. Before moving on to sound performance, First, we need to ask ourselves what is really a DDC and if we need a unit like this or not. So first of all, this one was blessed with every possible digital input and output, so you can hook it up to almost anything out there. You can put it in between your PC and your DAC, in between your media server, network streamer, what else? CD player, CD transport, and your DAC. So there are many other possibilities, which is already quite impressive. However, the main reason, the most important reason, is to maximize and to unlock maximum performance out of your DAC. When USB standard was first introduced in 1996, it was made in order to connect peripheral devices with your PC, like mice, keyboard, and printers, and not like real-time data transfer without losing bits of information. Of course, modern DACs already started bypassing that issue. Some of them have hardware buffers that are working like a RAM memory, so they can bypass such limitations of the USB connection. Secondly, the USB ports of your PC and laptops are being powered by switching mode power supplies, and those aren't that great. They can pass noise, they can have spikes of voltage and current, and of course all that goes inside those ports and inside your DAC, downgrading the final outcome of your DAC. And lastly, the internal clocks of your PC and laptop, they need to do a handshake with the clocks inside your DAC. And of course, all those aren't so great, so you'll be lowering the timing, dynamic range, and resolution of your DAC while doing so. With a good DDC, you are basically bypassing all those issues I just mentioned and a few more depending on the quality of the DDC. So musicians crafted this one as their statement unit, so they put actually the highest precision femtosecond clocks in this one. You have high-speed isolators on all digital inputs, so all the noise that is coming from your PC will be stopped right here. And of course, there's a hybrid power supply implementation and overkill filtering stage. So there is something else compared to your PC or media streamer or something like that. Secondly, if you have an I2S capable DAC, I do believe that I2S is actually the best digital input for multiple reasons. For example, USB and I2S are the only digital inputs that can natively decode 32-bit PCMA files and DSD files. And secondly, for USB, AAC, optical, and coaxial connection, you need a digital receiver on your DAC to receive such data. But with I2S, you don't have such a chip, so all that signal goes directly inside your DAC, so shortening the signal path and of course delivering a purer sound. And after trying all its outputs, so optical, coaxial, AAC, and I2S, I definitely prefer the sound of the I2S. It sounds just a little purer, clearer to me. And let's check how Phoenix actually performs with their best DAC yet, with Aquarius. I used an I2S connection in between Phoenix and Aquarius, and with the help of my beloved, I started comparing its USB input with the I2S input. Aquarius on its own, it's a mighty fine sounding DAC, so I actually reviewed that one. You can check my review somewhere around here. That one was certainly, up there with some of the finest hardware DACs that I tried. It was just a little below that Rockna Wavelight, which tells a lot about how I feel about the Aquarius DAC. So on its own, I would never call it as muddy sounding or slow sounding or soft sounding via USB, but it felt that way when I started comparing USB versus I2S. So it was clearer sounding, there was more details in my tracks, but more interesting than ever is that those cymbals were sharper, clearer, but completely brightness free. With no listening fatigue, I could focus on their trail, on their shimmer, on their decay. That would take up to 2 seconds, for example. Something that was not so clear, so defined on the Aquarius via USB. So I used my high-performance Vara, so I used my headphone setup while doing this comparison, mostly because I wanted to bypass room acoustics, and still high-performance Vara sounds just a little crisper, a little more detailed compared to the KF reference 3. And with the high-performance Vara, I know exactly where sound inception points are located, with my tracks. I know my tracks very, very well. And after adding this one into the chain, I felt like I was in a slightly bigger ball of sounds, like there was bigger void spaces in between the notes. So it wasn't really a bigger sound stage, but a more focused imaging in a way. So I could easily focus on the leading edge of the notes, something that was not happening so easily via USB input. Detail retrieval went up, and that was actually quite apparent, and I could easier trail and focus on a small musical instrument playing in the background, even if 20 more musical instruments were playing on the foreground, something that was not happening as easily via USB. When I moved to Vivaldi's Storm by Two Cellos, I've observed that timing improved as well. So it was not faster sounding per se, but it was quicker shifting those dynamics. So from slow to fast, it was doing that a lot faster in a way somehow. So it was not faster, but it was more impactful, quicker in a way. It's hard to describe by words. I've observed that with old music, with half-century old recordings, with my old gypsy jazz, with my old blues in general, it was always organic, smooth, very relaxed sounding, without getting any kind of grain, without straining myself. It was very relaxing. And the other way, with modern tunes, it was trying to impress me with those quick shifts in dynamics. So it was changing its personality a little bit depending on the music that was playing. Something that via USB was not that impressive. So dynamics definitely improved via Phoenix. Resolution went up, and of course noise went down. By the way, about noise, it was dead silent via USB, so there was an absolute silence via USB with the Aquarius, but there was a haunting silence via I2S with the Phoenix. So in a way, it felt like there were bigger void spaces in between the notes with the Phoenix. Another trait is that the sound was a little fuller. So it was fuller bodied, it was denser sounding. There was definitely a little more sub-bass definition, a longer natural decay of the cello and a heavier piano notes with every keystroke. Getting cymbals right, as I was telling, is quite a complicated task for most DACs, but with the Phoenix in place, I've heard one of the most believable cymbals on an R to R converter. Then I decided swapping that Aquarius DAC with a mid-fi R2R ladder DAC from Musician, which is their Pegasus DAC, which, by the way, I also reviewed, and you can check my review somewhere around here. So on its own, Pegasus is quite a smooth, relaxing, but also a highly technical sounding DAC. But with this one in place, I felt a muscular, a bolder version, a more dynamic version of the Pegasus. So it was quite a different unit altogether. After adding that Traffomatic Primavera, I felt that Hyphaman Susvara replaced my eardrums with punching bags, because clearly everything was faster, more impactful, snappier sounding than ever before. Hard as a Rock by AC/DC felt so raw, so impactful, so energized that I don't remember hearing that song so amazing on Aquarius, for example. Via a Singxer SU6 DDC, which by the way is also an amazing DDC just below $1 I felt just a clearer, a more transparent, a more detailed version of the Pegasus. But with the Phoenix, I felt exactly as clean, as detailed, but this time it was a little different in terms of tonality. So it was a little warmer, a little denser sounding, punchier sounding, smoother sounding. So this one is definitely sounding a little different compared to the Singxer SU6. Modern tunes felt rejuvenated with a better kick and also with a tighter and a better control of the drivers. And I know it sounds weird how a DDC can improve the control of the drivers, but it felt that way with this one. So Pegasus is already on its own very impressive in the low end, in the bass, very impressive. Probably the most impressive part in the frequency response about the Pegasus is the bass. But at this point, with the Phoenix in place, it feels just bottomless in the bass. Deeper sounding, tighter sounding, certainly delivering a higher quality type of bass with the Phoenix. While it was clearer sounding in the top octave, in the upper treble, It was definitely a little sharper sounding in there, but it was never bright or, you know, harsh sounding in the treble, as if I ditched those PCM recordings in favor of some DSD recordings. Lastly, I wanted to know how the Phoenix behaves via coaxial/BNC output with something like a Chord Electronics DAV. So DAV on its own is a mighty impressive DAC, always going super fast. It's very dynamic, it's very impactful, it sounds just amazing with modern tunes. It goes in and out in split seconds, amazing transit response. The only thing that I would improve with the DAV would be add some smoothness and add some liquidity with older tunes. For example, with half-century-old recordings like Gypsy Jazz, like Old Blues, DAV cannot slow down, it cannot slow its pace, it cannot, you know, make you relax completely, you know, it cannot put you into a state of nirvana, something like that, by the way. So it was always going super fast, even with old tunes, something that I wanted to change a little bit. So after adding this one into the chain, it felt exactly that what was missing with the DAV was added by the Phoenix. So it made it a little more liquid, a little smoother sounding, a little more organic sounding in a way. It felt like I added a Chord aim scaler into the mix because it sounded very alike. So they have a very similar skill set, this one and the M scaler, so very alike. With the Singxer SU6, I felt just a little clearer version of the DAV without altering its sound signature. But with this one, I felt it exactly as clean, just a little smoother, a little more relaxing sounding, a little more organic and natural sounding. It was a bigger change compared to the Singxer SU6. Since Chord DAV is already a world-class DAC, I felt the improvements weren't as big, wasn't as drastic as it was the case with the Pegasus and Aquarius, clearly suggesting that its USB input is slightly better compared to those units. I've also compared the Phoenix with a Singxer SU6 DDC, which is an amazing DDC below 1 grand. I cannot recommend you enough this one, really great sounding below 1 grand. But since I really dislike long and boring reviews, please check out my written review that I've put around here. It's on chapter 5, I believe, and it's one click away. As for my conclusions, if you are still using a USB connection in between your PC and your DAC, then I believe a well-made DDC will improve your listening experience. If you're using entry to mid-level DACs, you can go with a Singxer SU6, which seems like a much better deal. But if you are using high-performance, high-end DACs and you want the absolute best, if you want to squeeze the maximum performance out of them, then I believe that Musician's Phoenix is exactly like that. So it changed the fate of 3 high-performance DACs. Some were marginally improved, where others felt like a high-performance versions of themselves. And I'm sure that it will improve the sound of many other DACs. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. A much longer, in-depth version of this review you can find below in my written review. Please check that out. And as usual, listen to more tunes, be positive, and I'll see you around. Cheers!